waiters and waitresses. What is the most awkward couple date you have ever witnessed at work? Story 1. The management of a lounge cocktail bar at a luxury hotel was one of my first jobs in New York, maybe 3 or 4. A rather cheesy-looking man approached me and insisted that he got that window table for his date tonight. He had slicked back hair, an awful suit, etc. He had a reservation at 8 o'clock. After I told him I couldn't promise anything, etc., he handed me $400 and gave me a how about now look. And in the end, I gave in and assured him that I would take care of it. He then asked if I would want to go a bit further by walking over to the table while he was there with the date and acting as if I recognized him from a movie as he was counting the hundreds in front of me. At this point, if I'd gone this far, why not? Sure enough, later in the evening, he showed up with a blonde bimbo. After they had a glass of champagne, I went over to the table surrounding them and asked how they were doing before approaching him and doing the ritual. "How is your evening treating you?" I performed an Oscar-worthy double take with her before I left. "Do you happen to be?" "You have to be." At that time, he was grinning like a jerk and enjoying the attention from the young man. He had just finished paying off, but most significantly for him, it was effective. She was enthralled. They soon departed, and as he was leaving, he gave me another $600. I fully anticipated him to be a jerk and leave a little or no tip at all. Even if the person behaved badly, at least he had the money to sustain it. Good. It seems that we are dealing with a real-life, attractive lady problem here. Instead of a prostitute and a successful businessman, the couple is cheesy, looking, and blonde. What individuals are willing to do for love, or maybe just having fun. Let's get real now. He was a complete jerk. However, at least he had the money to support it. He also didn't rob you of the tip. I suppose that simply proves that love can be purchased with money. Or a phony feeling of it. Who knows, though? Perhaps they are still together and living their most cornball existences. Story 2. I'm a little late, but I'll tell my tale anyhow. One night, we had a couple visit and everything looked to be going well. I asked the newly recruited server, who was still in training, whether she had any queries. She was still anxious about the welcome table, so I let her know she could follow me around and see how I work. When we approached the couple's table, the new waiter just says, "You freaking wet" to me. I was aware that you were lying to me. It turned out that the man was her boyfriend, who was out on a date with his sidekick and was unaware that she had just started working there. She wasn't fired as a result of what she stated. I hope she started using it as her table greeting. Oh my goodness, what a crazy tale. I mean, this scenario is a train disaster, to put it mildly. New server is subpar. Most likely, she had no clue what she was getting into.
When she heard the lady yelling at her partner, I can only image the expression on her face.
When you're first shadowing someone, that's not exactly what you want to hear, but at least it makes for some intriguing anecdotes to share afterwards, right? Story 3. At the dinner theater where I work, we often have proposals where the winner is shocked by their partner who pops the question after coming up on stage to get their prize. Usually, it's sweet and gives everyone in the room a nice, fuzzy feeling. One man specifically asked to sing a song because he wanted to go farther. He brought everything, even his own music. We agreed to let him handle it since we are quite laid back about this work. We act out the draw. In front of 400 people in the room, the lady enters the stage as the music begins to play. It seems that this man was a bit worried, so he made up for it by drinking a little. The song that this guy wrote, which appeared to be about how he was sorry for sleeping with this woman's sister, is then performed in a drunken manner. Finally, he goes down on one knee and pops the question. Normally, this would be met with cheers from the audience, inspiring the individual to respond yes, but not after that disastrous performance. All the while, the poor lady was simply clutching her face and shaking her head while asking, "Now what's wrong with you?" He and our stage manager are left on stage as she rushes out, to much crowd grumbling. The only thing our stage manager can say about Mike is that he stayed for the duration of the concert and consumed a lot more alcohol. Even though it happened years ago, it's still one of the most revolting things I've ever seen. That's certainly not your normal lovely proposal tale, to be honest. I love witnessing romantic gestures and proposals, so I can only image how embarrassing and awkward that must have been to observe. He was understandably anxious, but trying to calm himself down by drinking wasn't the best course of action. It simply worsened the situation and made his performance even more intolerable. Please don't cheat on your lover with their sibling, or anybody else for that matter, for the love of everything that is lovely. Story 4. On a weekday while I was working the bar, this man entered. Typical-looking man in his late 20s. He told me he was anxious since it was his first date in 3 years, and they had met on Tinder as he sat down and asked for a drink. In order to calm some of his anxiety, he arrived 20 minutes before she was supposed to show there. He waited for her for 2 hours but received no text or contact from her informing him that she would be late. I thought, wow, she really came when the lady enters and approaches the male. "Are you Joe?" she asks as she turns to face him. "Yes," he answers, appearing tremendously delighted, and he stands up to properly welcome her. She just exits after saying, "No thanks. What a hideous thing." Joe is not really his name. And I continue to drink excessively for a Tuesday. Poor ordinary Joe ends up being much too inebriated on a Tuesday. God wouldn't have given us tequila to drink with our tacos if he didn't want us to get blitzed on a Tuesday. Story 5. I worked at a fondue restaurant where a 2-course dinner took an hour and a half to an hour. He had already made arrangements with us to deliver an engagement ring together with the chocolate sauce and melted chocolate on the platter when the office couple arrived. "Will you marry me?" misspelled. There are also flowers and other decorations on the plate. She apparently explained to him how terrible a partner he was during the whole lunch. Too dependent and emotional in some way. Additionally, he didn't spend enough time with her, and they didn't seem to connect. A 1-hour-long breakup speech was given. We emerged from the corner with a platter of chocolate fondue, lighted candles, and an engagement ring. They made every effort to wave us away from the table next to them. To record the wonderful moment which never materialized, I was holding a camera. He made an attempt to deliver his prepared speech, but it was so awful. Finally, we decided to leave the dessert on the table and make an effort to behave normally. Before the check arrived, she departed. Oh my, this tale makes me so uncomfortable. I can't believe how much thought and preparation went into this proposal, only for it to utterly fail in the end. The wait staff even came over with an elaborate setup for the proposal, but they were sent away by the table next to him. Talk about making things worse. The lady leaving before the check arrived was probably for the best in the end. The awkwardness of trying to pretend that nothing had occurred while trying to eat the remainder of the dinner is indescribably worse. Story 6. I was in one of those upscale speakeasies. For their POS system, they began opening up and installing a new invoice printer. On slower machines, waiting for the printer firmware and driver to install might take 30 or 40 minutes. I am therefore observing individuals as I stand there and watch the bars fill up. I see a stunning blonde in her late 20s seated next to a man in his mid-40s who has a very well-groomed appearance. He seems to have just left a high-end legal office based on his attire. She also seems as though she would attend a chic professional cocktail party following their date. He is courteous, chatty, and clearly really into her, but you can see by the expression on her face that she isn't feeling the same way. She is now somewhere else than that pub. She hurriedly takes up her phone, contacts someone desperately, and pleads for a fast pickup as soon as the man leaves to use the restroom. The call's main point was that the man was her mother's colleague. Her mother had organized the date, and our daughter wasn't feeling it at all. A man of her age enters after waiting for around 15 minutes, puts some money on the table, and then excuses them. She claims some undefined urgency and is led away. The elderly man keeps on drinking from his $140 tab. Noting that I flirt with the server while at the main cash register, fail to acquire her number, pay with exact change without adding a tip, and then depart. I told everyone that I had a rough night. Story 7. While working as a waitress in college, I saw the single most humiliating thing that could possibly happen to a potential date. The poor guy gets up in the middle of their meal, taps his wine glass to get everyone's attention, and then proceeds to gush about how wonderful his girlfriend is, how much he loves her, and how fortunate he is to have her in his life. This happens during our Friday night dinner rush. She simply sits there and watches him the whole time, giving him the most uninteresting expression on her face. It was so odd, like, yeah, tell me something I don't know kind of thing. The miserable man then takes out a ring, bends down, and proposes to her. This is the ring you want me to say yes to? She asks, giving him the most disgusted look she can muster. Are you mentally impaired? Could you be more affordable? She then stands up and leaves, leaving the unfortunate man to remain on his knees. He did not have to pay for the lunch. Bro escaped harm there. Okay, I'm aware that it's improper for me to take pleasure in the suffering of others, but this particular tale makes me want to giggle anyway. How uncomfortable must that have been for all those involved? In the midst of a bustling restaurant, the poor guy is attempting to make a grand romantic gesture, and the lady simply stares blankly at him. The whole time was twisted. Story 8. A pair entered the restaurant looking really gothic. Although I wasn't their server, I was nearby managing the cash register. They said that they were energy vampires and that we shouldn't be afraid of them since they won't harm us. They said they didn't need our food for nutrition, but they did like the flavor. After placing their order, they asked the waitress nicely if she would linger for a while so they could absorb her aura and draw energy for the rest of the evening. The waitress nodded in agreement and sent a sidelong look my way, which I took to suggest I had best leave a generous tip. Before reclining in their chairs and sighing as if they had just had a turkey feast, the pair held hands, closed their eyes, and made sucking noises for almost a minute. The waitress received a generous gratuity in recognition of her zestful spirit. Wow! That is a tale you don't hear every day for sure. I mean, I've heard of a few of energy vampires dressed in goth clothes, but I've also heard of some pretty bizarre restaurant patrons. That is unquestionably a first. The waitress must have felt uncomfortable when they begged her to remain so they could take advantage of her aura. What do you even say to it, really? Sure. I'll just take a moment away from helping customers so you can drain my energies. In all seriousness, though, this tale just serves to highlight the fact that working in the food industry, you never know who you're going to run across. But as long as they're not misbehaving and they're enjoying the meal, I say let them go ahead and do what they're doing. The future. Perhaps soon we'll all start seeing more energy vampires at our neighborhood eateries. Story 9. While I was serving, a female made advances at me in front of her boyfriend. After getting her going, the boyfriend left, leaving the girl to uncomfortably sit by herself for some time. It was extremely weird, so I asked a buddy to take over her table. Story 10. My first date was while I was probably in college. The girl remarks I'm having a really nice time while they are eating. But now that my buddy has contacted to ask if I want to hang together, I truly have to go. Story 11. Worked as a cocktail server at a bar in a posh restaurant. This pair enters at a busy period. Guy seems irritated, while girl displays constant excitement. He's entirely ignoring the girl who is attempting to speak to him. He answers a call and converses on the phone for at least 10 minutes before hanging up and engaging everyone else in conversation except her. He begins hitting on the female bartender and ultimately the cocktail waitress as well as myself as he becomes more and more inebriated, saying he could get us all much better jobs in Atlanta. At this moment, the date's companion had begun weeping. He then rants at the bartender after realizing that it was the restaurant's fault that she was unhappy. He's had such a bad date, she shouts at him to stop shouting at the bartender. He then leaves and claims he didn't even want to eat here. He isn't footing the bill for her food and beverages, thus she ought to have chosen a nicer venue. Then he claims that she didn't seem that large in her image and that if he had knew she was so huge, he wouldn't have invited her out. Most likely we connected online. She withdraws to the restroom as the man makes a scene. While the bartenders and management attempt to deal with him, I go to check on her with one of the other bar patrons. The girl is really distraught, so I reassure her that she may go by the back door and that I will recover her bill from the bartender. When I returned, the man had already stormed out, refused to pay, and given his date a check for about $200. She didn't have the money to pay, but a few regulars at the pub paid for it. This made the whole evening very unpleasant and tense. Unquestionably one of the most unforgettable moments I had there. Regulars in the bar are bros.
Oh, he sounds like a tremendous winner, don't you think? I'm talking about neglecting his date, making advances on another lady, and then disparaging her beauty. It seems as if he is attempting to violate the most dating conventions in a single evening.
Moreover, he refuses to pay the bill, leaving his date with a sizable balance. What a gentleman! I really hope the poor girl never has to deal with a guy like him in the future. She can find solace in the fact that she's not the only one who has had a disastrous date. We've all been there after all. But perhaps none of us have had a date that was quite the horror. Story 12. Fight. Wife sobbed. Upon rising, the husband tossed a pizza piece in her direction. I cry at a lot of things, but I would be really furious if my lover flung a pizza in my face. Story 13. The date seemed to be going well, but the man felt tense and restless. As he spoke, he was slightly swaying back on his chair. Eventually, he flew too near to the sun, knocked his chair over, knocked himself out cold, and wet his trousers. He had to be carried on a stretcher out of the dining room. While his Tinder date did the right thing and over the course of 20 minutes, and right away headed to the bar and placed a shot order. We delivered them to her at the home, and he tipped his chair backward and collapsed. Story 14. I suppose you could call this a date for two. On a rather boring night, I was working at a wine bar when a married couple sat down. They ordered after I went through the specials and the appetizers were served. The guy decided that serving his wife would be a nice idea. Divorce documents. I tried to stay away from that section of the bar. I did get some tissues for my wife, who was sobbing. In the end, I packaged the meal. He made payment. I don't envy that journey home, however. Someone I know experienced this. She was totally unprepared for that. He never once brought up divorce. They seemed to be getting along well. The next evening, he took her out to dinner while informing her that he had already begun the paperwork. They had also been married for around 15 years. Oh, wow. That is just tragic. I can't even begin to image how the woman must have felt when she unexpectedly received divorce papers while out on an apparently typical date with her husband. Just harsh, that. The morale of the tale is that you can never know what problems individuals are facing in private. It serves as a helpful reminder to always be nice and compassionate toward people, since you never know what they may be going through. Story 15 had a deaf couple fighting. They both left, frantically signing to her, weeping and asking me for a stack of napkins. I thought she was crying. She grabs a pen and begins irately penning paragraph after paragraph after paragraph. It was difficult because I kept having to go back to the table since they had ordered many meals. He was simply eating and signing, and when they eventually left, she was weeping and crouched over the table, writing furiously. But they gave me a good tip, so I suppose it wasn't too horrible. I knew a deaf man who had a small chip on his shoulder. He would kind of go looking for the employees and make a big deal out of not understanding them. When my pal served him and signed off superbly, it backfired. She said he could hardly sign at all. And after having the rug ripped out from under him, he simply uncomfortably stood there. Story 16. I'm not sure if that qualifies, but one of my tables at Olive Garden was reviewing their divorce papers when I accepted the table. The lady responded, terrible, when I inquired how everyone was doing. The two of us are divorcing. How would I respond to it, say? Story 17. The Sunday morning shift at the local restaurant where I worked every week while law school was always so quiet. It was largely okay since I always brought my schoolwork. Every other week, this pair would stop over, have a gin and tonic and some nachos, and stay for hours while joking about sneaking around and other such things and discussing how attracted they were to each other. I never gave it much consideration until I entered the dining room from the kitchen one day and saw the woman was already sitting in a booth facing me. Across from her, her dude's bald head was looking away from me. I went over to the couple's table to see whether they wanted their usual. When the guy turned around, another guy was there. As he spoke to me, the woman gave me an embarrassed look. His wife's birthday was that day, and they had never dined at my establishment before. Like, how exactly do you respond in such a circumstance? However, it's amusing in a sense. These two are coming in every other week and fooling about and talking about how attracted they are to each other, and you were unaware that they were wed to other individuals in reality. However, at least they were commemorating a noteworthy event, right? And who knows, maybe they were just looking to change things up and try a different eatery. Story 18. A little maybe 5'4" man paid $720, arrives with a huge lady who is nearly 6 feet tall and worth $300. Both of them are heavily tattooed and pierced. I guess you want more than that. The man replies in a seductive voice before I can take the woman's order. He replies, "You know, I do," as she grinned at him, then places 3 additional entree orders. This was obviously important to them. They often visited my restaurant, and they seemed to be quite happy together. I feel like I contributed something to this odd couple's eating obsession for around 3 years. Story 19. A pair was enjoying beverages at my place of employment. After using the restroom, the girl returned and confessed to sleeping with the guy's brother. They both apparently were ejected after glasses were flung across the room. Before I put this on him, let me do a few lines. Story 20. I saw a guy in his mid-40s seated at the bar with a young, gorgeous lady in her mid-20s. They were conversing and placing drink orders. Nothing unusual occurred, perhaps after 45 minutes. As soon as she enters the pub, a woman approaches them. You unrecognized," she exclaims while grabbing the guy by the shoulder before letting go and leaving. The guy looked at his alleged date, said she does that, and then walked out of the room, leaving his date to remain there and stare into space until she departed. Foreplay between an odd pair is unpleasant for the random girl, however. A mere pawn in their sinister game. I admit that this tale is a bit strange. Who knows what the situation with that couple was after all? Perhaps they engage in some form of foreplay where they like being interrupted on date. Maybe it was simply a strange night for them. Or maybe they were simply odd individuals in general. Story 21. Not quite a date, but in the poshest restaurant I was working at the time. I once served a couple who had gotten together to negotiate the terms of their divorce. They arrived before the dinner rush, so they were pretty much my only table. Every time I checked on them, the lady was visibly upset and crying, and they were arguing over their daughter's holiday schedule, timeshares, and other things. Although it wasn't the end of the world, it was really difficult to enter while they were still in a state of high emotion to refill their drinks or replace their forks. However, it seemed that they were managing the circumstance far better than many other couples. Story 22. A lady played her Tinder dates off of one another like contestants on a game show. They seemed to be ignorant of the outcome. Bill sharing was amusing. I really wanted you to finish it with the men that left her there and went to the pub with you. Story 23. When I was a bartender waiter a few years ago, I was bringing meals to a table when I saw that my ex and her new partner were seated there. It was quite uncomfortable for everyone as we had just stopped seeing each other a month ago. I'd say she was intending to do it. Story 24. This trashy couple I served were already repulsive individuals, and to make matters worse, the lady was attempting to jerk the guy off beneath the table covertly. Unfortunately, I didn't deal with it when I noticed it occurring and simply acted like nothing was wrong. Story 25. Working on Valentine's Day at a Chili's. In the restroom, the girl handed me her phone number along with her boyfriend. When I got back, I had to deal with her being kind in him for the remainder of supper. I didn't text or phone her. Every time she looked me in the eyes after that, it felt strange. Oh my, it simply brought to mind a buddy and a female he was dating. She was making flirtatious eye contact with another man at the bar. He stood up, approached the man, brought him back to her, introduced them, and then left. No drama or outrage, just a simple exit. It was quite funny to see. Of course, she apologized as she ran after him. That evening, he abandoned her. It seems like there will be some juicy drama at Chili's on Valentine's Day. Come on, really? Who provides their phone number to the waiter in the restroom with the boyfriend? That invites difficulty from the get-go. Speaking of humorous relationship tales, that buddy of yours handled the circumstance wonderfully. He simply quietly presented his girlfriend to the man she was admiring and left as opposed to being all irate and theatrical.